Hi everyone. Today we're going to finish up our note on the quadratic formula. So recalling from last class, the quadratic formula is as follows. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This part here that's underneath the square root sign, the b squared minus 4ac, that's called the discriminant. And it helps us to find out exactly how many times the parabola intersects the x-axis. Or another way of saying it is how many x-intercepts you actually have. So if I'm looking at just what's underneath the root sign, so the discriminant, and I find out that that number is bigger than 0, that means I have two x-intercepts. So in that case, it would intercept maybe here and here. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, that means I have exactly one intercept. And the way that happens is if the vertex of the parabola lies right on the x-axis. And the third situation is when b squared minus 4ac is less than 0. That means I have no x-intercepts. That means that the parabola does not intersect the x-axis anywhere at all. So last class, we talked about when to use the quadratic formula. So we talked about the idea that if we have really, really big numbers, so numbers that are in the hundreds, really, really small numbers like decimals, or the third option, and probably the one option that you're going to pay the most attention to, is when you can't factor, when you can't find the product and sum. So we're going to try some examples, and you're going to determine whether or not you should use the quadratic formula or whether or not you're able to factor. So example number 1 says x squared plus 5x plus 2 is equal to 0. So if you want to start the question, you should start by finding out the product and sum. Well, the product here is 2, and the sum here is 5. Is there any way that you can get two numbers that multiply to 2 but add to 5? If you can't, then you probably can't factor. In that case, you want to use the quadratic formula. So to start with the quadratic formula, label what A is. A is 1. B is 5, and C is 2. Substitute into the formula and check your work. So when you substitute into the formula, this is what you should get. Your final answer is minus 5 plus or minus root 17 over 2. That means one answer is minus 5 plus root 17 over 2, and the other answer is minus 5 minus root 17 over 2. Those give you decimal answers, so you can use your calculator to find those decimal answers. But this is a perfectly acceptable answer. This is called an exact answer. Now, let's do 2. Question number 2 says x squared minus 3x minus 1. Again, I want to look for a product. My product here is negative 1. My sum here is negative 3. Will two numbers multiply to negative 1 but also add to negative 3? In this case, if you look at it, you can't do that, so factoring is not a possibility, so you're going to want to use the quadratic formula. Again, label A, B, and C. So A here is 1, B here is negative 3, and C is negative 1. Take an opportunity to pause the video right now so that you can fill out the formula and check your work. Now, if you've had an opportunity to substitute in the formula, this is what it should look like. And then your final answer should be 3 plus or minus root 13 over 2. Okay, next example. 9x squared minus 6x plus 1 is equal to 0. All right, so here you want to find your product, and your product here is 9 times 1, so 9. And your sum is negative 6. All right, what two numbers multiply to 9 but add to negative 6? You should get negative 3 and negative 3. Well, I want to divide by the number in front, so that's 9 and 9. That becomes negative a third and negative a third. So if I write that in brackets, that becomes 3x minus 1 and 3x minus 1 equals 0. So far here, I've factored. I want to now solve. So the next step is to say what x is equal to here. So x is equal to a third from this bracket. It's also equal to a third in the other bracket. So they're both equal to a third. Fantastic. Next example. In the next example, I have 2x squared plus 3x is equal to 7. Well, first of all, I don't like the form that's in because it's not in standard form, so I'm going to change that first. So I've got 2x squared plus 3x minus 7 is equal to 0. My product here is negative 14. My sum here is 3. So what two numbers multiply to negative 14 but add to 3? Hopefully you can find something. If you can't, that means you're going to want to use the quadratic formula again. So here, a is equal to 2, b is equal to 3, and c is equal to negative 7. So plug the numbers in into the appropriate formula, and then check your work. So if you're checking your work here, check that to see that your numbers are in the right spots and that you calculated appropriately. Your final answer should be negative 3 plus or minus root 65 over 4. Last example. So in my last example, I have 2x squared equals 5x. Well, I don't particularly like the way that this is written, so I'm going to change the format of it. So I'm going to say 2x squared minus 5x is equal to 0. Well, right now, this is in standard form. There's just no c term. So step 1 of trying to factor is, hopefully you said taking out a common factor. If I take out a common factor, that's x, and I'm left with 2x minus 5 in the brackets. Well, this is factored, and it's as far factored as it's going to get. So that means here that x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 5 over 2. Hopefully you've got a good understanding right now of when to factor and when to use the quadratic formula. You don't really have to have, this is what I do all the time. Sometimes, like in this question here, you may not see how to factor. You may not remember that you should take out a common factor. So if you want to make a 2 and b negative 5 and c 0 and you want to use the quadratic formula, you're still going to get the same answers. So that's not a big deal. I'd like you to take the opportunity to do the homework, make sure that you do the practice, and I'll see you again next class. Take care.